In Albion Online, most settings aren't particularly important and are more of personal preference. However, there are some that do have significant effects on gameplay, and so in this video I'm going to show you the 15 most important settings to make sure that you have. Starting off in our general tab, the first important setting is this warning before entering PvP areas. If you are somebody that plays in the yellow zone regularly, you want to make sure that you have this enabled. If this is not enabled, players can flag up in the yellow zone and then push you into the red zones, and without that warning you'll be automatically zoned into the red zones, and then they can kill you and take all of your stuff while you're in that red zone. Normally this isn't really an issue because if you're there you can just move away or zone back and you don't really have to worry about it. However, if you happen to go AFK or disconnect at a wrong time, it could happen to you, and most importantly, if you are transporting through the yellow zones, like transporting between cities, even if you are active and at your computer, if you get dismounted, you'll be overweight and you won't be able to really move, and so people can very easily dismount you, push you into the red zones, and then kill you. So if you play in the yellow zones, just as a safety measure, have the warning before entering PvP areas enabled. Just as a quick note with this first one, if you go to the bottom tab here too, you can also customize this a little bit, so have no warning for black zones, but have warning for red zones, just in case you don't want that for everything. Next, also in our general tab, is the vanity settings. Vanity might not seem like a particularly important thing for gameplay in Albion to really care about, but it actually really is. Like most things, Albion is a game where information is everything, and so being able to very quickly see just generally what your opponent is wearing is extremely important. This is especially important if you do any larger scale fights, even like 5v5s plus, because you don't necessarily have time to inspect everyone individually to see what they're wearing, so just getting a general idea based on the look of your enemies is super important. You 100% need to be able to very quickly tell the difference between somebody that looks like a tank versus somebody that looks like a support, like instantly. For these settings, you want to make sure that you have it only show in safe areas for all opponents and allies. For yourself, doesn't really matter too much, but especially for enemies and allies, you definitely do not want these enabled in PvP zones. Moving on, we have the graphics tab where we find our third important setting, which is resolution. Resolution is pretty standard and basic. I mean, it's there for every game, but in Albion, it's particularly important. If you see my screen here, I'm recording in standard resolution, but I actually have a widescreen resolution monitor. You can see mine is 2560 by 1080 instead of the normal 1920 by 1080, and you can see I have black bars at the top and bottom. This actually lets me see farther out to the sides of my screen than someone with a normal resolution would be. So this is what it looks like with my resolution, and then this is what it looks like in a normal resolution. Now, even if you don't have a widescreen monitor, you can still get the widescreen look if you set a custom resolution on your graphics card, basically. I won't get into how to do that, there's plenty of tutorials out there, but if you want to have a widescreen resolution, it does help. You can't see nameplates earlier, but you can do things like click on people and inspect them earlier, so it is definitely an advantage. Fourth, also in the graphics tab, we have the effects settings. This is just hidden in between all of the sort of other performance-based graphic settings, but show effects is like one of the most important settings in the game. You need to make sure that this setting is set to all. There's basically no situation where you wouldn't want to see all the different effects. Like, for example, if someone casts a Hellion jacket, you won't be able to see the little red outline around them if you don't have effects on. It doesn't have any cast animation. You'd have to look at their buff bar and notice it to really see it. So, I mean, for so many things, you just need to see what's going on, and you need these effects. Fifth and last in our graphics settings, we have obscured character highlighting. This is one that you generally want on. What this setting does is it allows you to see things a little bit more clearly through terrain. So if you see this bunny up here, if it hides behind the tree and I don't have this on, I will not be able to see the bunny at all. Same with any mob or player if you do not have obscured character highlighting enabled. But if you have it enabled, then it will show like this red outline or blue outline depending on if it's friendly or enemy, and you'll be able to see like the outline of it through a tree. Basically, it just lets you see things around you way easier, especially mobs that don't have natural health bars, and so you won't get tagged by them as often. Sixth, we have sound settings. So sound settings are surprisingly important in Albion, especially the effect sounds. So you can actually hear farther than you can see in Albion. So if there's someone like clearing mobs off screen, you'll be able to hear that before you can see that. So it's important to be able to hear your effect sounds very clearly. Also, the brain just processes audio information faster than visual information, so it does increase your reaction time too. I will also note ambient sounds here as well aren't really needed, however they can be helpful for finding things like corrupted dungeons and solo dungeons, as they do make a distinct sort of hum, and you can again hear that farther than you can see it, so it will help you find dungeons and stuff like that. Moving on to the interface tab, number 7, we have Show Harvestable Tooltip. What this will do is when you hover over a resource with your mouse, it will show the name of that resource. For experienced players, you can just turn this off, it's not really needed, but if you're starting to learn the game, like when I was learning, I always struggled to figure out what was what resource, and this is a really helpful way. You can just hover your mouse over it and it'll tell you exactly what it is, so it's really helpful for learning different resources. At number 8, we have Spell Indication Areas. This is very similar to the show effects settings that we had in the graphics, where this just increases the amount of information that is available to you. So the most important part of these settings is to always have enemy damage on and ally healing on. These are the most important things for you to be able to see clearly and quickly, and so you want to make sure you have them on. Ally damage can be on or off depending on your familiarity with like a weapon, for example. So if you are trying to learn like the precise AoE of a certain attack, you might want to have this on so you can see the clear indication of where exactly that spell is hitting. But if you already know it and you're more experienced, you probably want to turn this off, as it can lead to a little bit increased screen clutter and also lag. For enemy heals, I would suggest just not enabling this outside of very niche situations. Usually you're not going to need this information. I will also note for this, the intensity does not have to be 100. Again, it's basically the opacity of it, how clear they are to see. As long as you can see them, they're good, so just play around with it and see what you like. Number 9, also in our interface, is the single most important setting in Albion probably, which is Show Offscreen Name Tags. You need this enabled. I mean, you need to be able to see people that are coming and going, and you can see name tags like twice as far as you can see actually people. So, I mean, the amount of information that this gives you is incredibly important. If you don't have this on and you walk towards a ganker who goes invis as soon as they see you, you will literally never see them. So do yourself a favor, make sure that this is on. Lastly, in interface number 10, we have open world tooltips. You want these to be on for dungeons. The other ones don't really matter, it's just more of your personal preference, but for dungeons they can give you some information in some situations that could be helpful. The tier of a dungeon is not always going to correspond to the zone tier that is found in if someone pops a map, for example, and so if you go into a dungeon and it is clear, you can hover over the entrance to the next floor and it will tell you the base tier of that dungeon. Basically, in some really niche situations, it lets you see what tier the dungeon is without ever having to see a mob. Moving onto the control tab, we have number 11, double press to attack. You want this enabled. So as you get better at Albion, you will learn that inspecting everybody is super important, and to inspect somebody, you have to select them and then press the inspect key. If you do not have this double press to attack on, every time you select someone, your character will try to attack them. Even if you're mounted, you're both mounted, your mount will like turn towards them and stuff. So it's just annoying, and it's also bad to have this not enabled because you'll constantly be trying to attack someone whenever you're trying to inspect them. So for the most part, you want to make sure that you have this on so that your character isn't constantly turning towards things and trying to attack things when you're trying to inspect people. Number 12, also in the control tab, is forced combat mode. You want this off. Basically what this setting does is that when you are in combat with an enemy, it will lock you out of certain actions. Actions that the game doesn't think are helpful for you or that you wouldn't want to do while you're in combat. So for example, like looting a body. Sounds like it could be helpful in some situations, but like 99% of the time, it's just not. It can prevent some misclicks, but misclicks in this game aren't very punishing anyways, and it can be detrimental in many situations, so generally you want this off. Moving on to number 13, we have the social tab. This isn't really a setting that's going to help you with your gameplay, but I still think it's incredibly important to create custom channels and chats. The default ones are not good. They're filled with so much clutter. Basically, like the language chats you basically always want disabled. Those are so cancerous. Same with global chat. Really, I would highly suggest making your own custom ones, as it makes the chat a much easier and less frustrating feature to use, and helps you streamline information. Moving on to the key bindings tab, we have our last two settings. Number 14, send a ping at current position. This is a really important thing if you're playing with a group in the open world, and this default key is P, which is like on the opposite side of the keyboard as where your hands are normally going to be. So I would highly suggest moving this to somewhere where you can easily press it while you're also playing the game. You basically need to be able to comfortably press this button while you're fighting something, so like I have it on X, which is a pretty easy button to press. Last but not least, number 15, toggle region map. You can say the same thing about the ping button as the toggle region map. This is something that you want to be able to really easily bring up constantly and consistently. Having it on N is a little bit awkward for most people. You can press it with your thumb, some people do, but I personally prefer just moving it to tab, which feels a much more natural place to bring up on a really important map. Just note, if you're going to copy me and move it to tab, tab is currently like the arena scoreboard setting thing, so I just put that on N. Okay, and those are the 15 most important settings in Albion Online to make sure you have set up. I hope this video helped you. If it did, do all the things you do to YouTube videos, and I will see you in the next one.